Hello everyone. Today we are going to learn two important concepts in goods and services tax. The first one is reverse charge mechanism. RCM. As you all are aware, in a normal GST payment process, there are three parties involved. The first one is the supplier. The second one is the receiver. And the third one is the government. Now, what happens in this chain of transaction? The supplier provides goods or services to the receiver. The receiver, in return for the goods or services that he has received, pays a price. And this price is inclusive of GST. Then the supplier rightfully deposits the GST amount to the government. This is what happens in a normal GST payment process. Now then, what is this reverse charge mechanism? Reverse charge mechanism is a situation in which the receiver becomes liable to pay GST to the government. Let's have a look. The three parties remain the same. We have the supplier, we have the receiver, we also have the government. So what happens? The first step remains the same, wherein the supplier provides goods or services to the receiver. The receiver, he then pays the price. But the price does not include the GST component. In fact, the receiver pays the GST amount directly to the government. Now this is what reverse charge mechanism is all about. The chargeability gets reversed. Instead of the supplier paying GST to the government, the receiver pays GST to the government. We are all consumers. We are all receivers of goods and services. We do not go and after receiving or after purchasing the goods or services, we do not run to the GST department to pay taxes. Then where does this situation of RCM come up? That is, when is the receiver liable to pay taxes? Let's have a look. Now, let's have a look at the cases where RCM is applicable. The first situation where RCM is applicable is when the supplier is unregistered. For a dealer to get himself compulsorily registered under GST, his turnover in a year needs to cross 40 lakhs. Now, supposing we have two parties, A and B. A is the supplier and he is unregistered. B, as the receiver of goods and services, is registered with the GST department. So what happens in this situation? Since A, as the supplier, is unregistered with the GST department and B, as the receiver, is registered with the GST department, the liability to pay tax falls on B, who is the receiver of goods and services. So, whenever the supplier is unregistered and the receiver is registered, reverse charge mechanism applies and the receiver becomes liable to pay GST. The second situation where RCM is applicable is when services are offered through an e-commerce operator. Here also, the situation of RCM comes into play. We have a number of e-commerce operators providing their services in our country. Here also, the liability to pay tax falls on the e-commerce operator and not on the registered service providers offering their services on the e-commerce platform. Yet another situation where RCM is applicable is when the supplier is in a non-taxable territory. What is a non-taxable territory? A non-taxable territory is one in which the GST laws are not applicable. So, supposing the supplier is located in a non-taxable territory and the receiver of goods is located in a taxable territory, then the liability to pay tax falls on the receiver who is in the taxable territory. And there is one more situation where RCM is applicable, and that is for goods and services notified by the government. The government also issues a list of goods and services wherein the recipient is liable to pay GST to the government. Some of the goods or services notified by the government include cashew nuts, silk yarn, lottery. So, in case of cashew nuts and silk yarn, the supplier is the agriculturist. The recipient might be any registered taxpayer, but the liability to pay tax falls on the recipient, that is the registered taxpayer. Also, in the case of lottery, we know that the supplier of lottery is the government, whereas the recipient might be the lottery agent or the distributor. There also, since the government has notified, the liability to pay tax falls on the lottery agent or distributor who is the recipient of the goods or service. So, to sum it up, we learned what is reverse charge mechanism. Reverse charge mechanism is a situation in which the liability to pay tax falls on the receiver of the goods or services. And there are four main situations where RCM is applicable. The first one is when the supplier is unregistered. Second one, when services are offered through an e-commerce operator. Third one, when the supplier is in a non-taxable territory. And finally, for goods and services notified by the government. I hope it's clear to all of you. Another important concept in GST that we are going to learn today is input tax credit. Before moving on to the concept of input tax credit, we need to understand the meaning of two other terms. Input tax and output tax. As a manufacturer, we might not possess all the raw materials or inputs required to make our product. We might have to purchase raw materials or inputs from other suppliers. When we purchase raw materials or inputs from other suppliers, we will be paying them a price, and that price includes GST. So, input tax is nothing but the tax paid when you purchase inputs or raw materials from other suppliers. So input tax is the tax paid by you on purchase of inputs. Similarly, when you sell your final output to the consumers, you will be collecting a price from them, and that price includes GST. Output tax is nothing but the tax collected from the consumers when you sell your final product to the consumers. Now, you don't have to pay the entire amount of tax collected from the consumers to the government. You get what is called as an input tax credit. Let's try to understand that better with the help of an example. Supposing this is your output, and to make this output, you needed 3 different kinds of raw materials, say A, B and C. And you purchase these 3 different raw materials from 3 different suppliers. When you purchased input A, you paid a tax of say rupees 80. When you purchased input B, you paid a tax of say rupees 70. And when you purchased input C, say you paid a tax of rupees 50. Likewise, after making your product, you sold it to the consumers. And when you sold the product to your consumers, you collected a tax of say rupees 300. Now, you do not have to deposit the entire amount of output tax collected by you to the GST department. Instead, you get a credit for the input tax that you have already paid. So, how much is the tax to be paid to the government? It is the difference between the output tax that you have collected and the input tax that you have already paid. So you need to deposit only rupees 100 with the government. You are getting an input credit of 200 rupees. So that is the concept of input tax credit. Businessmen, they use this input tax credit facility to reduce their GST liability. So, today we learned 2 important concepts in GST. The first one was reverse charge mechanism, wherein the liability to pay taxes fell on the recipient of goods and services. And the second one was input tax credit, wherein the manufacturer could get input tax credit facility or could avail the benefit of input tax credit facility and reduce their GST liability. I hope these 2 concepts are clear for you. Thank you.